March of the Ants is not a 4X space game, they said. You can't make this game about space, apparently. Well, I know what I can and can't do. There we go. Space. All set up. March of the Ants in space. Take 1. Rogue leader standing by. Rogue 2 standing by. We've got Imperials on our back. Rogue 2. Rogue 2, answer me! No, I've got ants! Ants covering me! Ah! Ants in your trousers! It's an incredibly uncomfortable time for everyone. And you know what else is an uncomfortable time? Twilight Imperium 3. Amazing segue, by the way. Now you might be asking me, what has TI 3 got to do with ants? And, well, there was this game on Kickstarter last year called March of the Ants. And one of the things that the Kickstarter project said was that the game was inspired by such games as Twilight Imperium 3 and Eclipse, but only takes a couple of hours to play. Now, condensing these wonderful mammoth 4X games into a under 2-hour experience is a very tall order, but it certainly captivated my imagination. Now, I love TI3, absolutely, but getting it to the table is an event that is less frequent than Christmas. So if there is something that can condense that experience and keep all the depth and strategy of a good 4X game into less time than it takes to cook a turkey, well then get me to the dining table, because I love turkey with ants. In a game of March of the Ants, you're trying to be the most hip ant in the meadow, which I'm sure is some sort of an internet jargon. And much like a teenager going through puberty, you evolve new body parts to become better than the other ants. And I don't know why really ants in the same meadow have such wildly differing evolutions. I like to imagine that maybe they're on some sort of a nuclear waste pile, but at the end of the day you're going to grow all kinds of weird body parts, like a exploding head, for example, and those will let you do various things, like you will be better at exploring, and you will take a new tile and add it to the meadow and then move your ants there and occupy precious spots that will let you do various things, like if you could cover your children's ears, they make larvae. Anyway, yeah, making larvae and gathering food and drawing more cards, which will let you evolve into other things and, you know, all kinds of special abilities. The game has variable length turn, which means you can play in either 3, 4, or 5 rounds. The base game is recommended to be played with 4 rounds, and I wouldn't probably attempt a 3-round game unless you just really want a very quick fix of ants. And yeah, as you expand onto this territory, eventually you will find that your neighboring ants have precious resources that you would really like, so you will go in here and try and kill them, which is always exciting. Killing ants is something I like to watch on a general basis. Each turn in March of the Ants is divided into 4 phases. The worker phase, the soldier phase, the queen phase, and this is where you get really flamboyant, and the slumber phase. And the main meat of the game really happens in the worker and soldier phase. During the worker phase, you will be taking a number of actions. You can explore by adding a new tile to the board and moving your ants there, occupying, you know, these spots that I mentioned in the previous scene. And you can march, which means you can take some of your ants that are initially larvae from in your larva chamber and put them either into the great tunnel and then move them out somewhere else, or you can put them into one of the sites you already inhabit. Or you can forage, which gives you cards. You draw a couple of cards, which are really important. Or you can play a card And the last thing you can do is, in many games, you can pause and stop doing things. But the thing that's different about March of the Ants is that whilst you are taking your action, everyone else gets to take a specific reaction. So for example, if you march your larva or ants, each other player can then move one of their ants one space. Or if you draw 2 cards, you forage, then each other player may gain 1 additional larva. And so the game never feels like your turn is really far away because of these reactions. You're continuously involved in what everyone else is doing, because no matter what they do, you get a little bit of something, which is a really nice mechanic. Not only does it keep you engaged, but you always feel like no matter how far your opponent is advancing, you're always getting a little bit of something, and that's very nice. And it adds an extra dynamic because you're trying to anticipate what your opponent is going to do, because if you know what reaction you're going to be able to take, you can plan out your turn a little bit better. But everything you're doing will cost you food, and they are these little pellets, I guess, future food anyway. And it basically limits the number of turns you can take, because food is not only used to do actions, it is also used to feed your ants, because at the end of every turn you will need to feed them or they'll die, or eat the larva, which is actually incredible and very thematic. And yeah, so there's this constant balance of how much larva you're going to have, how much food you're going to have, and how much of your larva you're actually going to turn into ants, because ants need to be fed. But at the end of the day, you pretty much want the most of everything, because whilst this is definitely a 4X game, it certainly has a build your own engine element where you're trying to occupy more and more spots, because every time you explore one of these hexes, they have these spots that effectively at the end of the turn will give you something. So this will give you a larva, this will give you a food, and this will give you a wormhole, because it's a teleport place. You get it? Like in space, right? Like any good 4X game, March of the Ants features battles. And after you're done with the worker phase, after enough people have passed, you move on to the soldier phase, which is where you check for any contested hexes. Now there are 2 types of battles in March of the Ants, and one of them is against other ants. That's when you have like ants in the outskirts of the hex fighting for the control points inside. And the other type of battle is when you have a centimeter, which means there's a invading bug in the meadow and the ants are going to try and fight it off. And that kind of brings this cool imagery to my mind, at least, you know, where all the tiny ants are on top of a giant centipede and they eventually overtake it. It's pretty neat. I kind of like that. The battles are fairly simple. You normally count the number of ants you have in your hex for attackers and defenders, and the number of head evolutions you have, because ants like to headbutt each other. And then you fight, and you basically get to discard one of the cards that you have in your hand to add to the combat value, and that number is usually in this corner right here, and they are discarded in secret and then you reveal those cards, and the winner gets to kill a bunch of ants and the loser gets to kill a smaller number of ants. There's always casualties, which is kind of cool. That's what war is like. War always has casualties. It's incredible how closely tied the worker phase and the soldier phase are. For example, if you decide that you're going to invade a hex, let's say you are red, and you decide that one of your actions will be to march a bunch of ants into this other hex, take over some spaces and start contesting it, you know, provoking a fight with the other ants. Now, you have to spend your food to do that, and if this is your last food, you know that you're not going to be able to react to whatever else your opponent is going to decide to do about what you're doing. And if they do have more food to spend, then you can bet that they certainly will spend some time, you know, making more larvae, moving them on into this hex and fighting with you, or, you know, possibly even spending more food, moving even more larvae and trying to completely dominate that hex. Not only did you just move your ants into total destruction, but you've probably also given your opponent a colony point, which is not great. You don't want to do that. So you certainly have a lot of depth between these two phases, and they're not separate. They certainly interact with each other. And to round it all out, they're all followed by a queen phase, which is where you collect all these resources. If you have any ants left alive on these spaces, you will get these things. And after that, you will have to feed your ants, as I mentioned before. And to follow it all up, you get a royal decree. Each player gets a choice of either getting 2 food or 5 lava. And that choice always kills you, because you always really want more lava, but the sane person inside you is telling, please take the food, because you'll have like 1 action next round. A lot of us are guilty for buying games based on how they look. I am also guilty of that. I am a sucker for gorgeous art on a board game, and March of the Ants is certainly not an exception. It is a great looking game on the outside. Now, I say on the outside because, well, the quality of the art of the actual game is very eclectic, to say the least. First of all, let's have a look at one of these tiles. And I don't like it. I'm really sorry. I know this is just a gradient. Most of the time when I look at artwork on a board game, I measure it by, can I do this myself on Photoshop? And if the answer is yes, then that's very bad. And I think this is one of the few times when actually I can say, yeah, I can put some textures and a gradient on a tile. That's not very difficult. And that is slightly upsetting. And as for the quality of the cards, well, some of them do look amazing. Let's take a look at this card, for example. It's gorgeous. It is absolutely wonderful. The artwork is stunning, which is great. But a lot of these have been lifted from the box cover, which is also disappointing. There is some unique artwork on the cards, but it's not a lot. Now, it gets a little bit worse, sadly, because the artwork on the cards seems to come from 3 different artists. This is the second type of artwork, which seems to be a stock photo of nature with an ant painted over it. Not fantastic, but the biggest criminal here is what I like to call the comedy artist on these. And they, not only do they look very different from the rest of the cards, they also look a little bit silly. And artwork would be forgivable if the game actually manages to deliver. So is March of the Ants any good? And well, that's not a very simple question, actually. And it'll take a little bit of explaining to answer. The first experience me and Elaine had of March of the Ants was the 2-player game. And I'm very sad to say that this game should not be for 2 players, really. It was probably the worst experience of March of the Ants that we had. And it certainly painted a negative picture from the outset for us. And the biggest culprit for that was the cards. There are 3 types of cards in March of the Ants. The first being the objective cards. Now, when you play these, you get something extra, but in addition to that, you get an objective, which means if you fulfill a certain requirement at the end of every round, you will gain extra colony points or victory points, whatever, they're the same thing. And they point you towards a different direction and kind of form your play style. And that's great, that's a great element of the game. But the problem is that whilst they are very good, they are together in the same deck with 2 types of other cards. The evolution cards, which make your ants better. They make you walk further, they make you fight better, they let you gather more resources, which is all very good. And then the third type of card is the event card. Everyone knows what this is. You play it and it does something. Now, the fact that you have no choice over how you're going to expand your evolutions, over what objectives you're going to be choosing, over what events you're going to be getting, means that, or you know, you can't even decide whether you're going to go for an evolution because you can't. You might just keep drawing event cards. And whilst they're all very powerful, actually, they're not all very powerful. Some of them aren't, and some of them are really good. There is a certain balance in the game. because of these cards, and they came into play in a very strong way in a two-player game. And what ended up happening was we mostly weren't focusing on this board and expanding the board. We were just fighting over territories by playing cards that did a lot, and it felt like a game of flux with a lot of ants and hexes. But all's not lost. The 3 to 5 player game is a much better experience. It's a lot more deep and strategic, and you have to watch what all the other players are doing, and there's a lot more going on board, and because of the reactions, that just adds an extra level of strategy. But at the end of the day, the cards do come back in, and some of them are, again, so imbalanced, like this exploding head that will just basically blow up an ant hex, and there will be no more ants there, likely blowing up your own. But it lets you avoid combat, and it lets you deny other players colony points, because each time you win combat you get colony points, and that you want colony points because that's how you win the game. However, it's not a game without merit, because I did enjoy playing March of the Ants. It was a good experience. I had fun thinking about, you know, how much larva am I going to get, how much food am I going to get, how am I going to balance it out, how am I going to leverage cards, whether I want to play them or when I want to save them for combat and add them towards the combat value. And all of these elements were great. I just wish there was some form of balancing out the cards, or not maybe even balancing out, but making a sort of a tech tree, which again probably would increase the length of the game and make it more complex and take longer, defeating the purpose of this being under 2 hours. So the real question is, can we get a 4X game that is under 2 hours and has a lot of depth, or is this the best we're going to get? And the answer for me is, I feel there's probably some sort of a happy in-between place that we want to aim for. And stacking every single card into a single deck just feels like lazy design. On the buy, play or stay away scale, I would say that March of the Ants is a play. Play it, see whether you like it. If you enjoy it, go get the game. That's all I can say. What are your orders, Emperor? Well, my orders would be probably to subscribe, to no pun included. There's a button up here somewhere, because we really want you to join. If you enjoyed the video, then, you know, subscribe, and then you'll get other videos from us sent from Russia with love, except we're not in Russia, we're in England. But it doesn't really matter, because love, peace, and board games.